tweeting everywhere Marie Yovanovitch went turned bad.
You know, it's, I will say, and I know this will sound naive, you know, in this age of Trump, I am genuinely shocked by his behavior with regard to this Foreign Service officer of 3 decades, to disparage her, to demean her in sexist overtones, saying the woman over there, to threaten her, to say to a foreign leader that she's bad news. You know, presidents usually understand that the job is bigger than them, that it's about the government, that you're representing the people. I am genuinely shocked, and I sound naive in saying so, given the things that President Trump has said in the years that he's been president. But I'll tell you something, she made a mockery of his dismissals of the deep state. If this is the deep state, I bet a lot of Americans looked up and said, yeah, I'll take more of that. Because these are people who are dedicating themselves to, yes, serving in places that are corrupt, that are dangerous, that are going bad, and trying to represent U.S. interests. I thought this was horrible for the president. And let me add, I don't know whether this will lead to impeachment. No. What this is an indication of how the president treats his people. They are his people. And I'll tell you who she else indicted today was Secretary of State Pompeo. Yeah. She says, they in the State Department knew allegations against me were false. And this West Point grad, this tough Secretary of State, didn't stand up for his people.
He comes across, by her testimony, yeah. John Dean, we're talking about the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, as weak, unwilling to do what a Secretary of State should do to defend career Foreign Service officers who risk their lives on so many occasions for the United States.
And he's a military man. He knows the importance of that. Right. He didn't arrive as a civilian like Rex Tillerson to take this job. Wolf, what struck me, it's almost breathtaking that the president is live tweeting this, and he's tweeting intimidation. This is criminal. This is their statute that prohibits that very kind of activity. And he's just not letting up.
Let me bring in our legal analyst. Is this witness intimidation?
I think that's where Schiff was going on this. I mean, the president has a right to express his opinion, and I do think this shows that the ambassador's testimony was getting under the president's skin. I thought the chairman's questioning was very effective. I thought Dan Goldman's questioning was very effective. The Republicans now have a big challenge. Because I think where they would probably want to go is kind of poke holes in her knowledge, poke holes in, do the sort of hearsay thing. But I think after this testimony, there are going to be a lot of questions that the public is going to want to know the answers to, and that so far we haven't. So, for example, it'll be interesting to see whether they identify potential reasons why Ambassador Yovanovitch was recalled. I think people are going to want an answer to what the president actually meant when he said that she'd go through some things. We don't know that yet. It'll be very interesting to see how the Republicans
Karen, the description of the president's behavior and those associated with the president, including Rudy Giuliani, among others, paints a picture of despicable behavior by the leader of the United States towards a U.S. ambassador.
It does, and what I found most compelling of her testimony so far is her description of how the institutions of government, in particular the institution of the State Department, is not holding up from the corruption that she witnessed in this administration and from this president and his people who were close to him, like Rudy Giuliani. She paints a picture of a State Department that has been gutted, of the Secretary of State and a president who throws out an ambassador that is working for U.S. interests. And her key point that she makes is that this is foreign influence. Mm-hmm. This was corrupt foreign influences in Ukraine that Rudy Giuliani was working with, and that triggered a decision by a U.S. president. And that is a critical national security issue, and it's a critical issue for the functioning of our democracy.
And Wolf, we only have to remember Benghazi to recall the righteous self-indignation that the Republicans expressed at what they consider to be a Democratic administration's disregard for the valor and the bravery of those serving in our diplomatic posts, security and otherwise. I'll be very interested to see how they treat the ambassador and their line.
And this whole, John, you mentioned this whole debunked theory that it was Ukraine that interfered in the 2016 election, as opposed to the Russians who interfered, which the entire U.S. intelligence community and allies concluded the Russians were doing it. The debunked theory, and we heard Daniel Goldman bring this up, started actually in February, the month after the president was sworn in which Putin suggested Ukraine was responsible for all of this, and that line was picked up by Rudy Giuliani, picked up by associates of his in the news media, picked up by these two Rudy Giuliani associates, including Donald Trump Jr. and the President of the United States himself.
There's what I call the pig pen aspect sometimes to the Republican defense, in that they throw up a lot of dust, and so it's hard to see straight ahead. It's hard to see clearly because there's all this dust flying. There have been stories, including by CNN back in 2017, of a Democratic National Committee staffer talking to people in Ukraine. Paul Manafort, who had a lot of business in Ukraine, was then the Trump campaign chairman, looking for information about that. There's no question about that. But this whole idea that the server is in Ukraine. Well, Mike Pompeo was the director of the CIA before he was Secretary of State. He is part of a consensus that says that's hogwash, to use a polite term, and that didn't happen, that Russia meddled. And again, in the end, they're trying to show that, this is part of a pro-Putin conspiracy theory to blame Ukraine, say it was in Ukraine. But here you have an incredibly powerful witness. To come back to the idea here, David makes a key point. This was different. This was off the rails. In trying to sway public opinion and perhaps sway any Republicans, wow, was she a powerful witness about I'm an American dream. I was appointed by Ronald Reagan. I have done this for years. I'm trying to fight the bad guys. And let's see how the Republicans come back at her. She says to this day she does not understand how foreign and private interests
Hold on one second.
undermine U.S. interests.
The chairman's speaking outside the hearing room.
At least no good reason, but we saw today witness intimidation in real time by the President of the United States. Once again, going after this dedicated and respected career public servant in an effort to not only chill her, but to chill others who may come forward. We take this kind of witness intimidation and obstruction of inquiry very seriously.
Do you think that's an impeachable offense, witness intimidation?